There are certain things in life that feel wrong before you can prove they are wrong. A nagging feeling that sits in your chest. A pattern that doesn't quite add up. A face that smiles too wide when it delivers bad news. For one homeowner, we'll call her Diane, that feeling started on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in late spring, when a crisp white envelope appeared in her mailbox with the HOA's logo stamped in gold on the front. Diane had lived in her home for 6 years. She was not the kind of person who ignored rules. She read the CC and RS the day she moved in. She kept her hedges trimmed, her driveway clean, her garden maintained with genuine pride. She had never, not once, received a fine or a formal warning in 6 years of living in that neighborhood. She paid her dues on time, every single quarter, without complaint. So when she opened that envelope and read the words, "Notice of violation, landscaping non-compliance, penalty, $350, she had to read it 3 times before it registered. The notice was vague. It cited her front yard flower beds as being in violation of Section 4.2 of the Community Standards, a section that, when she pulled out her CC&R binder and read it that same afternoon, described nothing more specific than a requirement for neat, maintained, and seasonally appropriate landscaping. Her flower beds were immaculate. She had just replanted them 2 weeks prior with fresh mulch, seasonal flowers, and new edging stones she'd spent an entire weekend laying by hand. She called the HOA's main line and left a message. She sent an email. She documented everything with photographs, time-stamped, thorough, detailed. She was confident this was a clerical error, a misunderstanding, the kind of administrative hiccup that would be resolved with a single phone call. Nobody called back for 11 days. When a response finally came, it arrived not as a phone call, but as a second envelope. This one containing a letter from the HOA board signed by the president herself, a woman named Sandra. The letter acknowledged Diane's photographs, but maintained that the violation stood. It offered no specific explanation for what exactly was wrong with the flower beds. It did, however, include a small business card clipped to the bottom of the page. The card advertised a local landscaping company called Greenline Property Services, describing it as the community's preferred and HOA-approved vendor. The letter strongly encouraged Diane to schedule a consultation. Diane filed the card away and hired her own independent landscaper, a professional with 15 years of experience, who walked her entire front yard and found nothing that violated any reasonable interpretation of the CC and RS. She submitted his written assessment to the board along with a formal dispute letter and a second round of photographs. She was thorough. She was professional. She believed the system would work. 3 weeks later, she received a third envelope. The violation had not been lifted. The fine had increased to $700 due to the dispute being unresolved. And once again, a Greenline Property Services card was attached to the bottom of the letter. That was when the nagging feeling in Diane's chest stopped being vague and started becoming something sharper. Over the following 2 months, Diane began paying closer attention. She started attending the HOA's monthly board meetings, something she had never bothered to do before. She sat in the back and listened. She noticed that Sandra, the board president, ran every meeting with a kind of practiced authority that didn't invite questions. She noticed that whenever landscaping topics came up, the recommendation was always the same: Greenline Property Services. She noticed that 2 other homeowners in the meeting mentioned receiving similar violation notices, similar rejections of their own landscaping work, similar suggestions to hire the same company. She introduced herself to those homeowners after the meeting. Their stories were nearly identical to hers. One of them had already hired Greenline after his 3rd fine, spending over $1,200 for work he'd been told was mandatory. He hadn't received a single violation notice since. Diane went home that night and opened her laptop. She searched for Greenline Property Services. The company's website was professional but thin: a few stock photos, a list of services, a phone number, and a contact form. No names, no owner information, no about page. The business had a Google listing with a handful of 5-star reviews, most of them posted within the same 3-month window about 2 years ago. She pulled up the state's business registration database, something that is entirely public record in most states, and searched for Greenline Property Services as a registered entity. The search returned a result almost immediately. Greenline Property Services LLC had been registered 26 months ago. The registered agent was a local attorney's office. But the listed owner of record, the name attached to the business as its sole managing member, made Diane's breath catch in her throat. The owner of Greenline Property Services was Sandra, the same Sandra who sat at the head of every board meeting, the same Sandra who had signed every single one of Diane's violation notices, the same Sandra who had clipped Greenline's business card to rejection letters and sent them to homeowners throughout the community. The president of the HOA was the secret owner of the only landscaping company the HOA ever recommended, the company that homeowners were being pressured into hiring through a manufactured cycle of fines, rejections, and escalating penalties. Diane sat back in her chair and stared at the screen for a very long time. Then she picked up her phone and called an attorney. The attorney Diane reached that night was not new to HOA disputes. His name was Marcus, and he had spent the better part of a decade untangling exactly this kind of mess. Corrupt boards, self-dealing officers, manufactured violations designed. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She had been coached by Marcus to be measured, factual, and precise, because measured, factual, and precise was far more devastating than anger in a room full of witnesses. She introduced herself by name and address. She stated that she had a matter of significant concern to raise regarding a conflict of interest involving the board president. She referenced the violation notices by date. She referenced the business card attachments. She referenced the state business registration record by its filing number and date, and she stated clearly and calmly that Greenline Property Services, the HOA's exclusively recommended landscaping vendor, was registered in the state's public business database as a limited liability company owned solely by Sandra. The room went very still. Sandra's expression moved through several distinct phases in approximately 4 seconds. Confusion, then a flash of something that looked like calculation, then a tightly controlled smile as she began to suggest that Diane might be mistaken, that this was perhaps a misunderstanding, that the board would certainly be willing to look into any concerns through the proper. Marcus stood up. He identified himself by name, stated his bar number, and indicated that he represented Diane as well as 2 other affected homeowners in the community. He stated that he had filed a public records request with the HOA that same afternoon for all vendor payment authorizations for the previous 24 months. He stated that he had documented $47,000 in payments to a company whose ownership had never been disclosed to the board or the community as required under the state's HOA governance statutes. He stated that he would be filing a formal complaint with the state's HOA regulatory office within the week, and that a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty and unjust enrichment was being prepared. He then sat back down, folded his hands, and waited. Sandra did not finish her sentence. 2 of the other board members, who, it turned out, had genuinely not known about Sandra's ownership interest, began asking questions she could not answer. The meeting dissolved into something that no longer resembled a routine HOA gathering. Within 6 weeks, Sandra had resigned from the board. Within 3 months, the HOA's own newly elected board had voted to terminate its relationship with Greenline Property Services, commissioned an independent financial audit, and approved a settlement that reimbursed Diane and the other affected homeowners in full. The $10,000 in accumulated fines that had been levied against Diane over 18 months reversed, every single dollar, and the business card for Greenline Property Services that Sandra had clipped to all those rejection letters. Diane kept one, framed it, actually, as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply pay close enough attention to notice what everyone else was meant to overlook.